Good afternoon, and welcome to our lecture for History 121. This is week 4, and as I get my notes here together, I want to go over real quick a couple of things. First and foremost, a number of you have contacted me. You still do not have the books. I need you to resolve that as quickly as possible. If you are waiting for the books to come in through the bookstore, contact them, see what the status is on that. If you want to consider using the link that I sent you last week to purchase the e-version of the book directly from the publisher, you can do that as well. We need to do that because the book is vital for you to take the exam. First exam, all the exams are going to be based on the textbook, and so I'll need you to get that as quickly as you can so that we can get the exams underway. That being said, we are going to push the exam back by a week just because enough of you do not have the book that it's going to be problematic for me to try and force that exam next week. So please make sure you get that taken care of as quickly as possible. Also, speaking of exam 1, I've gone ahead and posted the review guide, the review sheet for the first exam on D2L. It is on the content tab. There's a new section there that says review sheet. The review sheet for exam 1 is posted there. Go ahead and start studying on that, even though we're going to push that back a week. That'll give you extra time to prepare and move forward getting ready for the first exam. First exam will only be over chapters 1 through 4 in the textbook. So we've got that taken care of. Again, if there are any questions throughout the week, please feel free to contact me. I will be posting the homework up later tomorrow once you've had a chance to get this lecture under your belt. So let's go ahead and start talking about today's material. Today I want to summarize chapters 3 and 4. I want to talk about the rise of Greek culture. So if you could open up that PowerPoint, slide 1, it's a blue slide, the rise of Greek culture. I want to talk today about why Greek culture is so important, why we bother to study it, and just kind of go over the major developments of Greek history before we use that as a building material for future lectures in the units to come. So let's go ahead and go to slide 2. Why do we care about the Greeks? Well, we care about the Greeks because they're often seen as a root culture of other European cultures. That wasn't always the case. Really, prior to the 19th century, a lot of Greek culture was mistaken for Roman culture. It was also seen as unimportant. We're talking about an area of the world that once we get past ancient civilization, it will honestly become a backwater for the rest of European development. But the groundwork for European development is laid on the Greek peninsula and its surrounding islands. Greek culture is seen as a combination of the advances made throughout the Mediterranean world, especially art, architecture, literature, the sciences, mathematics, geometry. So many important first steps, philosophy, all take place in ancient Greece. And you can say the same thing about cultures in Mesopotamia, similar cultures in the Persian Empire. The fact of the matter is that Greece is part of mainland Europe, and as such, we see this as a direct step from the development of civilization in the Levant, in Mesopotamia, in what we will call the Middle East, and we see this taking place on the European continent. So that's why it's so important for the rise of Europe. There's also the fact that the artifacts of Greek life survived. We can go to Athens today and walk in the footsteps of Plato and Socrates and see the Acropolis. We can see all of these major Greek works of art, and we have these direct clues about the development of society and culture on the European continent. So that's why we worry about the Greeks. That's why a class like this always spends time discussing the Greeks. If you go to slide 3, let's just go ahead and give a little bit of a background to Greek civilization and culture. If you look at the map on the left-hand portion of the slide, towards the bottom you'll see the island of Crete. Crete is seen in many instances as the birthplace of Greek culture. It's the farthest out of the islands that you could consider tied to mainland Greece. Here we have a culture developed that we have named the Minoan civilization after King Minos. His city was the city of Knossos on the Isle of Crete. Crete is a global trading grounds. It's in essence, it's a crossroads of the Eastern Mediterranean. The people of Crete, it's a very mountainous, rocky terrain. There's not a lot of agriculture that goes on there, but they're a seafaring people. Pardon my dog. Sorry about that. Those seafaring people will take part in regional trade networks that tie together Egypt, North Africa, the Anatolian Peninsula, which is what we normally consider Turkey today, and the Levant, that area of Israel and Syria, as well as points to the west on the Italian Peninsula. So we have a very important trade network that develops through Knossos, but keep in mind that more exchanges hands than just money and physical goods when we have a trade network. We see the changing hands of ideas, of concepts, of art. And so these trade networks really work to spread and intermingle cultures and give rise to new ideas. And that's why these trade networks are so important. It's not just that we see the spread of wine and olive oil and wheat, but we also see the spread of how do we portray the human form in art? How do we build our vessels? How do we understand the world around us? How do we understand the basic concepts of humanity? These all are communicated through trade networks. And that's why this early Minoan civilization is so important. Now, it's not directly tied to Greece. From the artifacts that we found in the 20th century, and really we've only understood Minoan culture since the end of World War II, really. What we see is they use Linear A in their written texts. We have not translated Linear A. We don't understand what they're writing with that text. Mainland Greece, the Greek islands, they tended to use Linear B, which we have translated and has roots to other later languages. So again, it's not a perfect tie, it's not a perfect causality, but our understanding of early Greek civilization tends to say that it started on Crete and spread to the rest of the Greek islands, especially through the trade networks. Going to slide 4, when society does start to develop in the Mycenaean world, which is how we refer to the early Greek world, the early Greek civilizations, it spreads through a warrior culture. We have, instead of the development of great cities, we have the development of citadels. Citadels are locations built for defense and used by warlords to spread their strength, fighting other cities, dominating trade in a region, and protecting themselves. These warlords, when they invaded Greece, pushed out the original Greek occupants. We don't know much about those cultures that originally populated Greece, but we do know that the earliest settlements developed into these citadel cities. Athens has its start as a citadel, but these aren't meant for shared cultures. They're not meant for shared civilizations, shared lifestyles. Each citadel, they might be settled by like groups, groups with similar backgrounds, but they're not going to actively have ties with other citadel cities unless it's for a common defense in time of war. At other times, these citadels will declare war against each other on a common basis. Towards the end of the 13th century BCE, we are going to see the collapse of this citadel civilization. We don't know why it collapsed. There's a number of guesses. Disease, war, pestilence, climate change has played a role in civilizational change. But if you go to slide 5, one of the aspects that we believe caused this change in the ancient Greek world, the ancient Mycenaean world, is something we call the Sea Peoples. We don't have much direct evidence left in the Greek islands and the Greek mainland about the Sea Peoples. Most of what we understand comes from the records and inscriptions found in ancient Egypt. This illustration is based on a carving telling of Ramses III and his fight against the Sea Peoples. The Egyptians give names for where these people have come from, but these are not island names or nation names that we have yet correlated with other places in the Mediterranean world. All we know is that they came from the sea. They came from the sea from the north, is what these inscriptions tell us. What we do know about the Sea Peoples is that they were an invading force. They were a force bent possibly on settlement, but largely on destruction, piracy, conquering territories, destroying cities and citadels, and taking their wealth. So because of the Sea People, we generally see population centers throughout the Mediterranean world threatened and destroyed, with really the Egyptians as one of the few symbols of a large-scale civilization that survives the attack of the Sea Peoples. And it barely survives. It hangs on. It is disoriented and put into disorder for a prolonged period. But beyond that, we really don't know much about the Sea People other than they seem to have destroyed everything in their path and then left the area. Perhaps that's all we'll ever know. But they played a great role in the downfall of the first stages of Greek civilization. Slide 6, making a new Greece. Essentially, after the Sea Peoples leave, we will see a very slow rebirth of Greek culture throughout its islands and its homeland. We have a significantly lower population here following the attacks of the Sea Peoples, and because of that, we see those people who did survive making use of cooperation amongst themselves and amongst their other cities as a means to flourish in the wake of the wanton destruction of the old Mycenaean world. We'll see the rise of democratic Athens. We'll see the rise of people working together in the wake of the Sea Peoples. Democracy will come and go. It is not a pure democracy in that all people can vote and all people have a say in government. The only people that generally have a say are free male citizens of Athens in its democracy. Women don't have a political voice. Slaves, and slavery does exist throughout the ancient world, do not have a political voice under Greek-style democracy. One thing, and while I'm mentioning slaves, one thing I want you to keep in mind is that this is not slavery as we understand it in the American tradition. Slavery in the ancient world was often based on being captured as a prisoner of war. You could sell yourself into slavery if needs be in order to take care of debts. You could enter slavery for being a criminal. And so there are various reasons why people existed in a state of slavery, they were generally treated well. Their masters were judged by how well they treated their slaves. In some cases, they were treated as members of the family. In some cases, the masters worked right next to the slaves in the fields, making sure that labor and tasks were done. The one overarching thing is it is not racially based slavery. Slaves in the ancient world were not a particular skin color, nor did they come from a particular place, and the Greeks felt that they were superior to anybody who was held as a slave. Anybody could fall into slavery if you were captured at war. You could be a free farmer from the mainland of Greece. If you are called into service in time of war, if you are captured, you've now become a slave, simply because of the misfortunes of war. So it was radically different than American race-based slavery that we'll see develop in the 18th and 19th centuries. Again, with the rise of a new Greek culture, we're going to see the dependence on seafaring trades again, both fishing and trade with other city-states and other areas throughout the Mediterranean region. That's going to be vital for the support of life in Greece. Greece, as I mentioned with Crete, is very rocky. It has very poor soil. It's mountainous. You can raise crops in the valleys, but you can't raise large crops. These are not large farms. Obviously, all work is done by hand. And so it becomes problematic for these city-states to feed themselves, and they'll rely on trade in order to bring in enough food to support their populations. So that's why trade is so important throughout this region of the Mediterranean. Slide 7. With the rise now of the new Greek civilization, we're going to see the citadel replaced by the polis. The polis, the term itself is drawn from the same root for politics. It is essentially the descriptor of a city-state. At this point, we still don't see a unified Greek empire or a Greek nation. We have the city-state of Athens, the city-state of Sparta, various city-states throughout the region. These all have their own political institutions. They may be similar to each other in many ways, but they're not all going to be ruled in the same manner. Each polis is going to be dominated by its own god. Case in point, Athens is dedicated to the worship of the goddess Athena, for which it is named. That worship would take place in an acropolis. If you look at the image on the screen, the acropolis is actually the large pillared structure on top of the hill that dominates the rest of the city. That is the religious infrastructure of the city. Down below, we see people living, we see various houses and businesses, and towards the middle of the lower portion of that polis, we see a large open spot with people standing there. That represents the agora. The agora is an open-air market where we see, of course, the exchange of money for goods. But what we also see in the agora is an exchange of ideas. We have a gathering place for people. And let's face it, when people get together, they talk. They hold forth. Some people will teach classes there. Some people will sit there and observe the crowds. They'll talk about the crowds to their friends. And we'll also have the philosophers take advantage of the agora as a means of getting students and talking about their philosophies and the importance of their philosophies, communicating it to the world around them. Socrates, Plato, Aristotle are all living in the polis era of Greek culture. We owe their existence and the survival of their philosophies to the fact that they were written down, but that they were able to take place in public in the agora. Also, surrounding the city-state, we see depictions of small fields. Farming, it relies on very small fields in this period of time. You can only work so much territory by hand in this time period. Farmers, as I said with early cities, are going to live inside the polis and go outside its walls each day to work in their fields and then return at night. So that's the polis. That's why it's so important. We call them city-states as well because, as I said, they're all individual political bodies that are not part of a larger whole. Athens is essentially its own nation. So is Sparta. That's going to lead towards a period of struggle in their history. If you go to slide 8, struggles for power, the polis are going to cooperate when they need to, especially when their interests are threatened. We'll see this best exemplified during the period where the Greek polis are at war with Persia. The Persian Empire in what is now Iran, threatens Greek power and influences the various Greek states and their existence. And so when that happens, when people feel that they need to free themselves from the influence of Persia, we'll see the city-states work together in order to defeat Persia over a very prolonged war. However, once that war ends, we're going to start seeing fighting taking place between the various polis. This is especially going to be true between Athens and Sparta, the two major polis of this era. The Peloponnesian War is a 27-year period of time where Athens and its allies and allied city-states fight Sparta and her aligned city-states for dominance of the region, dominance of Greece. This extremely prolonged war is going to destabilize the economies of the city-states. There's going to be massive unemployment. There's going to be economic instability because of this unemployment. People won't be able to buy goods and take part in the trade cycle. And economic instability is going to bring about political instability. This is going to be a period of time where it's going to be very common for people to move, people to leave the city-state that they're in, the polis that they're in, to try and find peace, to try and move away from war, to try and find some form of stability. And this instability is going to have ramifications throughout the known world at its time because, as we've learned on slide 9, someone is eventually going to rise up to take advantage of this instability. That person will be Philip II of Macedon, or Macedonia. Macedon is the northern reaches of the Greek peninsula. We can see it here illustrated in kind of a peachy orangish color on the map. Essentially, Macedonia under Philip is going to create an incredibly strong military. It's going to create a military force that very few nation states or polis will actually be able to resist, be it militarily or resist in modes of diplomacy. What Philip II of Macedon is going to do is he is going to take advantage of this weakened nature of the other Greek city-states, and he is going to politically unify Greece under his control by conquering them. He's going to challenge these city-states one at a time on the battlefield. He will win. He has, like I said, a very well-trained army. He has magnificent generals, including his son Alexandros. And so In a very relatively short period of time, Philip II will be able to conquer the entirety of the Greek world and come to control it. He's going to unify this Greek world. It's going to be called the Hellenistic world. Hellenism is a reference to the various aspects of a common Greek culture. And this is the first time that we'll really see the rise of a common Greek culture because of Philip of Macedon. As I said, prior to that, the city-states did pretty much whatever they wanted to do, and varied from location to location in culture and government. And now with one military leader over all of them, we're going to see a unified nation or empire develop out of the old city-states, and they're going to share that culture throughout the word that I'm forgetting right now, throughout the archipelago. Philip II, unfortunately, will be murdered in 336 BCE, and at the age of 20, his son Alexander will take the throne, take control of that Greek army and everything that it represents and all the city-states, and expand his influence and Greek influence beyond anything that Philip II would have imagined. On slide 10, what will you do by the age of 32? Alexander the Great takes control of the Macedonian kingdom and the Hellenistic world of Greece roughly at the age of 20. For the next 12 years, he will take his army and sweep through what is then most of the known world and conquer it, all in his name, and spread that Greek empire essentially from the Mycenaean mainland throughout the entire Anatolian peninsula. He'll conquer Egypt. He'll conquer the old Persian Empire. He'll conquer all the way to the Indus River. He'll even try fighting in Afghanistan, only to find that Afghanistan is a very hard place to conquer militarily. The only thing that really stops Alexander from expanding even further is his own troops. After 12 years of continuous warfare and marching, after 12 years of continuously being home, his troops mutiny on the banks of the Indus River and essentially demand to go home. They have been fighting for 12 years. They haven't seen their family for 12 years. They're tired. Their friends are dead. They wish for this to be over. They wish to go home and see their loved ones again. And that's really the only reason why Alexander stops. Once he stops and begins moving backwards, that territory will start to shrink and be reclaimed by Alexander's enemies. We'll also see a situation where, Alexander's death will come about very quickly after he stops the expansion of his empire. What kills Alexander? Probably disease. Historians disagree based on the accounts left to us, especially the first person or primary accounts left to us by people who knew Alexander. It's possible he could have been poisoned. However, the poisoning that the people have identified looks very close to essentially a disease outbreak that sweeps through his army and could very well have also killed Alexander himself, the God King personified. If we go to slide 11, again, Hellenism is that sense of Greek culture and its importance as spread by Alexander. Essentially, Greek culture is going to follow Alexander wherever he goes. It's going to help him rebuild those towns that he destroyed when he conquered them. But what it's also going to do is it's going to establish the primacy of Greek culture for these surrounding peoples. We have several examples here on the screen of influential aspects of Hellenism. On the left is a parchment with the written language Koine Greek used. Koine Greek, Koine, is the common Greek language of the period. It's going to be used for official documents no matter where Alexander the Great rules. We also see the spread of cultural institutions. The various cities and city-states that Alexander conquers are going to be rebuilt in the Greek style and in the Greek manner. One of those things that they'll bring with them are the arts and cultural events. That is going to be personified by the building of amphitheaters in every major city, an example of which we see in the middle of this picture. The amphitheater is a place for plays to be put on. It is a place for political speeches and debates. It is a place where laws will be passed by voting. And because of this is going to communicate Greek culture to Persia or Western India or anywhere that Alexander conquers. You're going to see people, administrators, building copies of the world they left behind them in their new areas of conquest as a means to making things comfortable. But keep in mind, if you go to a play, even if you don't necessarily understand the language the play is being performed in, you can actually go and watch that play. You may not understand the words, but you can see the laugh line when it's done right, and you can learn lessons about the new dominant culture by studying the things that they bring with them. Another thing that is part of the Hellenistic world is art, and I've mentioned this several times. Greek art is important because Greek art is one of the first times that we see the representation of the human body, both male and female, in realistic architecture and realistic biological construction. We see the discus thrower here on the right-hand portion of our screen. He is seen as a pure physical or ideal physical specimen of what the Greek body should look like. It has muscles. It's showing an understanding of biology and an understanding of movement and how the body operates. And that will be reflected throughout Greek art. Alexander, as I said, will spend 12 years of his life conquering the known world at his time. When he dies, it is going to be left, the world essentially will be divided between four major generals who had been consorts to Alexander and theoretically knew what he would want, would be able to rule or operate in the style that Alexander advocated. And what's important about that is he didn't demand you accept Greek culture or Greek civilization or Greek government. You could live as a conquered state in the Greek world, and as long as you allowed the free trade of ideas, the free trade of goods, you could keep your own institutions. Cities who had patron saints that were not part of the Greek pantheon could maintain the worship of those saints. You could maintain your local customs and dress and speech. And so Alexander was cruel on the battlefield, and he was an effective military leader. He was not an administrator or someone who worried about how these things wanted to be run. So if I conquer your city and you already have a mayor in place, you already have a marker in place, be it what it is, for an example, those will be left alone as long as you pay your respect to Athens or to Macedonia, to Alexander, and then he's not going to remove your social institutions. He's actually going to encourage his officers and his men to intermarry with the local populations wherever they come into contact, settle, etc., throughout the lands that he conquered. This is going to help cement his power, because if you're a local and your brother-in-law is a soldier in Alexander's army, you're not going to rise up against your brother-in-law. You're going to follow the laws better. You're going to have more of a chance to live a balanced life of previous cultural aspects that you had, along with the new aspects of Greek culture that were coming in at the time. Great example of this is going to be Ptolemaic Egypt. Ptolemy I is a general under Alexander. His name is spelled Ptomley. Ptolemy was a full-blooded Greek, but he would come in to ancient Egypt, and he stripped the former political power rulers of their power, placing his family in control. And what that's going to do is that's going to, great example of the influence of Ptolemaic Egypt on our world today, or how we understand our world. The bust you see here in the image is actually a bust of Cleopatra. The famous Cleopatra, who was seduced by Mark Antony and Julius Caesar. She was full-blooded Greek. She does not look like an Egyptian woman because she was not an Egyptian woman. She was of a Greek family that exercised power over the land of Egypt, and eventually it was her turn to take that control. Honestly, once Alexander dies, his armies will fall apart and his empire will crumble around his former generals. There will be infighting amongst them. There will be fighting to control the polis, or population locations of other regions. And so this great world that Alexander had developed crumbles to dust, essentially. With the death of Alexander the Great, we're not going to see a redevelopment of Greek culture or a Greek nation state as we had previously known it. As a matter of fact, what we're going to see is, and we'll talk about this next week, is the rise of Rome in the wake of Greece. This is important because, as I'll speak to next time, Rome is not an ancient civilization when compared to the length of time that people controlled life on the Mycenaean Peninsula, or the Mycenaean world. Rome is going to do what it can to copy everything it sees coming out of Greek culture in order to give itself some legitimacy. But that's a lecture for next week. If you have any questions, please let me know. Like I said, this is just kind of a brief going over of the Greek world. Your textbook has a lot more detail, goes into philosophies, mathematics, sciences, etc. I encourage you to read it. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. My email is bob.welch@usd.edu. I would be glad to answer any questions you may have and to help you out as I may. I hope you have a great week. If you have any questions, feel free to get a hold of me, and I'll get the homework posted probably tomorrow, so I'll let you know when that's up. So that's all for me, folks. I hope you have a great day. This is Dr. Welch, and thanks for being a part of History 121.